Hello, and welcome to Will's Infinite Library. I'm Will, and this is Muffin. And this is my infinite library. And this is still Muffin. I'm gonna try to record a bit and see how it goes. If the purring is too loud, I might redo this. So I read a lot in March again somehow, and back to kind of my reading journey this year where I was trying to replace playing video games with reading books. Um, I think I've really done that. Like, books have become again, like they were in my youth, my go-to form of entertainment. It's seen me getting back to kind of my bread and butter of what I like to read, which I'll talk about more in this video because I think I really kind of found my niche again. So I'm excited to talk about some books that I loved in March and some that I thought were like fine. Mostly, spoiler alert, mostly fine. So I'll start off with the first book I read in March, which was another book in my sci-fi journey. If you will recall, I have been on this sci-fi journey recently, trying to, I don't know, get back into sci-fi, read some big sci-fi books from the past few years that have been on my radar, but I haven't, again, prioritized reading sci-fi. So now that it's back on my radar, this Ancillary Justice is a book that I've been really wanting to read. I picked up a copy recently at a book sale, and oh, that reminds me, before I get into the book itself, the St. Vital Children's Hospital Book Fair, which I took you to in a recent video, which I guess was about a year ago now, or maybe it was in the fall. I don't know, I'll link to it here. I picked up a bunch of books and I had them sitting on my shelf, didn't get to a lot of them. Ancillary Justice was one of them, and a lot of the other ones you'll see here, because I got a lot of good books. And then I started just reading a lot of books on my iPad because it was just more convenient to have them all there. I like how I can just set it up and prop it up and sit it on my lap or on a table. I just kind of like that convenience. But recently, I struggled to read on my iPad because I've just had trouble focusing on things. And so I'd start to read a book that I was excited about. I'd get like a page or two in and start thinking about another book that I wanted to read. Oh, there goes Muffin. Bye, Muffin. I'd start thinking about another book that I wanted to read, and I'd open it up on my iPad and start reading that, and then I'd think about another book I wanted to read, and I just could not focus. So I had to go to paper books. And back to Ancillary Justice, I picked it up at the St. Vital Children's Hospital book sale. Here it is. Here it is. Lovely copy. It has a little tear here, but it's in pretty good condition, and I love the feel of it. Something about the binding of it and the paper just feels really nice. And I love the artwork too. I love this. It kind of wraps around the ships with these like heavy, thick brush strokes. Beautiful, beautiful. And anyway, so I had a bunch of books sitting on my shelf from that, and then also from my trip to the Green Valley Book Fair, which I'll link here as well. I picked up a bunch of books that I hadn't gotten to yet. And so since I wanted some paper books, and the St. Vital Children's Hospital Book Fair is coming up again next month, I couldn't justify buying more books because I'm going to pick up a bunch there. So I wanted to get those books that I picked up recently. I wanted to read through those since they were sitting on my shelf, and I wanted to read paper books, and it really helped me focus. So Ancillary Justice kind of reset me there. So to get into this book a bit, it's a really complex book that tackles some really difficult storytelling approaches. And it's really interesting in that aspect. Like everything from like the way it's narrated to the way gender is kind of perceived by the narrator is super interesting and super complicated. Um, the first time I tried to read it shortly after I got it, and I just couldn't get into it. I kind of bounced off. And I think that is because it's quite challenging. I had to reread a lot of passages to really understand them, and just little things would trip me up. But the thing is that it feels a bit like high fantasy. This is what kind of put me off at first because I was expecting more of kind of like a space opera, judging by the cover. Um, but it feels kind of more like a classic sci-fi book, almost like Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke or something like that, or even like a planet heavy sci-fi like Dune. It often felt dense and like high fantasy with the like weird unpronounceable names and words that have like seven eyes in a row and things like that. And kind of like antiquated, almost clunky sentences at the sentence level. It also opens in a kind of snowy world, but at a tavern is one of the first locations we visit, which feels very fantasy. So it just gave me those vibes, and I kind of bounced off because I struggle with high fantasy because of that, because of the language, how old fashioned it feels, and really mostly because of that, honestly. So it gave me those kind of vibes. I was like, I don't know if this is for me. I put it down, but I kept hearing about it. It sounds so interesting. So I was like, I'm gonna read this book. So I read it. And like I said, it is challenging, and I did have to reread a lot. The main character is a spaceship, um, and she's referred to by a couple different names. One Esk, and oh my gosh, I forget the other one. Breck. Breck is the other one. One Esk and Breck. And it's been a while. I forget exactly. One refers to her kind of more as an individual. I think that's Breck. And one Esk is more of like her call sign as like a fleet of people. And like this is where it gets really complicated because she's a spaceship, but she's kind of a person and she's kind of an AI and she's kind of maybe a zombie. And that part I wasn't super clear on some of the world building pieces. There are some spaceships, and so spaceships are like spaceships, but their like systems are biological. So they're made out of people, and the Rad, I don't know how to pronounce the empire, the main empire that's taking over the world, taking over the universe, is in the past it used to take like colonize a planet, take it over, like assume all of the population into its empire. They would become part of it, and then they would take some of the people, kill them. I'm not sure exactly. This is where it gets murky, and replace their minds with the AI system. And so I don't know if that means they actually died or if they were just kind of taken over and were still alive. They get put in like kind of cryo sleep until they're needed. They would like amass a lot of people as they take over places and keep them in the holds of the ship until they need them. But anyway, over time, they got nice, this empire, and started, I think, only using volunteers and not making zombies. So I don't know, that part didn't all super make sense, but it was interesting. And where it got really interesting is that the main character then is part of this larger system of the ship. So I think she's referred to as a she, even though gender is murky here, is seeing the world through one pair of eyes some of the time, and then some of the time through multiple perspectives of multiple bodies. And that's where things get really confusing, and I found myself rereading. And it didn't throw me off like in the grand scale of things, but in the like moment to moment, I had to reread or it would be like, huh? Because I'd be picturing a scene where Breck is like sitting down talking to someone, and then it would suddenly be like, and then half a dozen of me walked out the door. And I was like, what? I was picturing like when you referred to yourself as one person, but you were really a bunch of people, and sometimes people in different places. So things like that make it really complicated. And also, the language didn't really help me. But mostly, the narrator is an observer, which was a pretty clever thing, I guess. So it doesn't really throw like the story trajectory or anything like that. Typically, you're seeing the world through this character's eyes, whether it's one set of eyes or many sets, and just seeing at different levels. It's really interesting because it's told in the form of two storylines that alternate, one in the present with one Esk slash Breck on a mission, and then one 20 years about, I think it's 19 years before, but whatever, before that, and shows the events that kind of set this mission in motion and give Breck slash One Esk the motivation to follow through with it. And it kind of is a slow burn, like as you see things in the past, you start to understand not really exactly what's happening in the present, though, yes, but like more the motivation and why things are the way they are today and why Breck is like, I have to do the thing that I have to do. So it's interesting in the way that it unfolds there, but it feels a bit like it was maybe done too much, like things were held back that could have been gotten to sooner. But anyways, it brings up some really interesting themes of like, where does an individual stop and where does society begin? When do you stop being an individual or a spaceship or like connected to other minds or part of this bigger system? Like, what is an individual really? Because it makes the lines really murky. And also then like, what is an individual's place in society and in the wider universe? So those are things that I found really interesting about it. And I feel like it tried to really explore these in a few key moments. There are a couple times, and one like major time when Breck was cut off, or One Esk was cut off from the rest of the ship from the other mines, and was a truly an individual and had to like figure out and was like really disoriented and not seeing things from multiple points of view. And that was really interesting. I thought like that was kind of what the book was trying to get to, like what everything around it kind of was building to, as she kind of wonders like, what am I, what is an individual, and what was I before I was this ship, and what was I before I was cut off from everything, and what am I now that I'm cut off from everything and have to like experience the world in a different way. So that was really interesting. And then the way gender is handled is really interesting. And I think that's one of the things like you hear most about this book is how it uses gender, and the main character specifically, I guess, kind of struggles to identify biological beings by gender and defaults to she, which is a cool kind of shift on like the patriarchy and like he this, he that, whatever, as like a default, or like referring to humans as mankind. So it's cool to see that shift and like just think about it differently. It makes you think about like gendered words, specifically in English, that have been used throughout time, and why, and like what if it was the other way. So that was kind of interesting, but it made me wonder too. Like I had some not problems with it, but questions. Like if this character One Esk doesn't really process gender the same way or doesn't care about it, like why even use gender pronouns at all? Why not use they, them, or some other kind of non-gendered pronouns? But it's a cool idea that makes you think about preconceived gender, so like I think it's fine. I was willing to be like, okay, I don't care about those like nitpicky things. Like it doesn't matter, and the story is interesting. It does some cool things, and it really makes you think. So overall, I found this book to have some really interesting ideas, and it was really cool how the plot slowly unfurled to kind of like work it out. But it didn't really blow my mind or like capture my imagination the way some of my favorite sci-fi books do. So I don't think I'll continue with the series. I think the things that I liked about it fleshed themselves out well enough in this book, and I don't think that I would get more out of continuing the series. I don't think I would super enjoy it. So at this point, I don't think I'll continue, but who knows? I would say for Ancillary Justice, good and interesting, but not great. It didn't change my life, but it made me think. So the next book that I want to talk about is one that I picked up at the Green Valley Book Fair. I picked up a lot of YA books here, so you'll see me going over a few YA books in a row. The Art of Starving by Sam J. Miller, I read years ago when it first came out, and I liked it and thought it was interesting. And interesting enough that I bought a copy when I went to the Green Valley Book Fair. I was like, oh, this is $4 and I would love to have it on my shelf. Sounds cool. So I bought it, didn't read it for a long time, and then I was looking for another paper book to read because I was still struggling to focus on my iPad. I picked it up and I just loved it so much. Like it reminded me of kind of like my ideal book, I guess, or like what I'm chasing when I read. It was so enjoyable to read. It was easy to read after Ancillary Justice. Like the language was modern and flowed easily. The narrator was one person who was easy to connect with right away, and all of that kind of thing. But this book, it's just so beautiful and powerful and sad. It's really realistic as well, but it's also hopeful, and it does some really interesting things. I will say there are some pretty big trigger warnings on this book for eating disorders and then um, suicide, but not like I don't want to give any spoilers, but it's not about suicide. There's no suicide happening, but there's like the idea of suicidal ideation, I guess, or like the idea of it wouldn't be so bad if I died, but I'm not going to actively try to kill myself. But then the lines blur there because the main character does have a eating disorder. He thinks that when he doesn't eat, he gets superpowers essentially. Like his senses get heightened. He can hear better, smell better, feel like vibrations through the world, like close his eyes and just feel or sense things in a different way. His sister has gone missing. She's not, I don't know if it's a spoiler to say. I won't say he's looking for his sister. She's not at home. And that's kind of his motivation is to find his sister, and he needs his powers to find her. So he tries to eat as little as possible, but it is very self-destructive. So it gets really dark and heavy in a lot of ways. He deals with depression a lot, but somehow it was still enjoyable to read. Like it felt very real, and he felt like a fully fleshed out person that had hopes and dreams and wants and desires. So it wasn't like overwhelmingly dark for me because I don't really like it when books are like only one thing or only another. So I enjoyed the like kind of balance there. And but what I really loved about this book is that perfect blend of like being an enjoyable to read contemporary book, but with like these kind of fantastic elements, a kind of magical realism thrown in there in a way that really pumps up the resonance of the realistic kind of day-to-day struggles of this kid growing up, coming to terms with his sexuality, his place in the world, and if he has superpowers. And it kind of like leaves that up for debate a lot throughout it, so I won't say too much more about it, but it's just really cool the way it's done. It really blends into the real world, and it really makes you think and question like what's really happening here. And like as soon as you think you're gonna figure it out, it throws kind of a wrench in the gears. That's a weird metaphor here, but yeah, like it makes you keep guessing. So yeah, I loved it so much. It was just really enjoyable and meaningful at the same time, and like a fresh idea that was really new and different, and reminded me of like my favorite kind of books are these kind of books that do all of those things and like tell a real story rooted in reality, but then they like shift reality in a way that makes you like, I don't know, it just pumps up the volume a bit and makes you see things in a way that you never would have if you hadn't read this book. So loved it and would highly recommend if you haven't read it, but note the trigger warnings there. So next, oh boy, I read another YA novel that I got at the book fair, which is Speak No Evil, because I wanted another paper book. It was sitting on my shelf. It was YA. I had just enjoyed The Art of Starving. I had been meaning to read this one for a while. Speak No Evil. It takes place in DC, in kind of the area where I grew up and then lived for a while closer to the city. So it was familiar stomping grounds for me, which is always fun to read about. But this book was so heavy. It to me didn't balance the things. Like it just went heavy and focused on like queer tragedy and just kept getting worse and worse for the poor characters. It's beautifully written. I would say it's a very good book, but just so painful. And it was kind of in a weird space because it's literary YA, which you don't see a lot of today. Like, I feel like you'll read these kind of books in school if you're studying literature or young adult literature, but you don't really encounter them in a bookstore today as much. And I feel like it's more literary than YA, like adult literary about a younger character. But it has really great insight into this kind of like intersectional character who is a young gay boy in the DC area. His family's from Nigeria. He's coming to terms with his sexuality, but like really has to stay in the closet for safety reasons. His father finds out that he's gay and takes him back to Nigeria for like straight mind washing, not quite like straight camp. It's like a church, 1 week church, not program, but like he has to go to Nigeria for a week and see a priest and like go to church all the time and go through these kind of traumatic experiences where they kind of tell him like you're evil, we need to fix you and that kind of thing. And it was cool to see like follow this character to Nigeria and see this different part of the world that I would not experience otherwise. So it was a really cool insight into his life and his world and his culture, but so heavy and so painful. And it was the weird thing about this book, I'll say, is that it's really short but very dense. It doesn't put dialogue in quotation marks, and it'll have like page long paragraphs, so it just like is really tiring on your eyes, I think, more than anything, to kind of like wade through like blocks of text. And you're like, did this person talk, or was this just like, were they thinking it, or I don't know, like it just makes you kind of have to reread, or at least for me, I struggled a bit on that level. But it's short, so it didn't take too long. And the other thing I will say on that kind of level is that it's kind of weirdly structured because there are two really main characters. Part one follows Neru, part two follows Meredith. And it's strange because like part one is like 150 pages and part two is only 50 pages, and we get such a shift in perspective. And I heard like it feels a bit strangely structured because of that. And I heard somewhere, I think I saw in a review or something, that someone had, I heard in a review that someone had read in an interview with the author that he was working on a book like years before this came out, that was this book that followed 6 protagonists. So I suspect if that's true that the other 4 got cut, and that's why we're left with kind of an odd structure, because it's, I don't know why they cut it. Like it would have been, I feel like the structure would have made more sense if you had only one character or the 6 maybe, but like the 2 uneven characters, it was a bit odd. But like a pretty good book, just really heavy. And then I read another book by Sam J. Miller, which was Destroy All Monsters. And this is a really nice hardback copy that I got for like a couple dollars at the book fair. Beautiful. Yeah, this one was different. I love Sam J. Miller's unique blend of fantasy and realism, which I think is present in a lot of his work. But this one approached it in a very different way than, the Art of Starving did, because it alternated between the real world and a fantasy world, and followed 2 characters, one in the real world and one in the fantasy world. And again, there's kind of the idea that the character in the fantasy world, are they really in a fantasy world, or do they just think they're in a fantasy world? It keeps you guessing as well again. But the fantasy world is really detailed, so you really feel like you're in that fantasy world when you're reading it. And just when you think you're starting to figure out what's going on again, it kind of makes you second guess. Like, what is real? What is in the character's head? Which is really interesting. One of the characters is a photographer. Wait, maybe they're both photographers. Yeah, I think they're both photographers. And there's a lot about art and what it means to be an artist and to kind of see the world through a camera. The next book I read, this one was an ebook because I ran out of paper books to read. So I had to read an ebook, and it was a struggle, but I did it. I found one that I could read and focus on, and that was Lily and the Octopus. It has a really great kind of setup where it's about this guy and his dog and their friends, and he talks to the dog and the dog talks to him, and again you wonder if this is a reliable narrator or not. And the dog suddenly has an octopus on its head, and it's just really weird and surreal, and you wonder, like, is this in the main character's head or is this really happening? So you can see there's like a theme going on here. I thought it was a really cool idea, and I was like wondering, like, what is this octopus, what does it mean, what's really going on here? But I kind of understood within the first few chapters what was happening, and the rest of the book just didn't keep me as engaged to figure out what was going on, or to, like, I felt like I got it, and I got enough out of the book from what I wanted out of it after a few chapters, and then I just kind of skimmed through the rest because just to see, and it, like, what I thought was happening and it played out. And I don't know, I think it's really interesting, and this is one of those books that I feel like would have maybe been stronger as a short story. And he even says, I think in the acknowledgments, that it started as a short story, and then he shared it with his partner, I think, and he said, keep writing it, like, write the next chapter. But, like, I kind of wish it was just that, because I feel like it would have been stronger and it would have left me wondering more. The other thing I wanted to say about that I found interesting, when thinking about themes and stuff and similarities, is Casey Platt's story that I recently talked about, or I talked about her book, but the story, I think it's called Portland, Oregon, which is in a couple of collections that I've talked about on this channel. A Safe Girl to Love and After Realism, which is about a girl and her cat. So this one's about a boy and his dog, and they are both kind of about, like, just chilling at the apartment and processing life and their relationship between a person and a talking animal. And I think, like, that story can definitely be expanded, but I feel like it's a short story idea because it is very much kind of domestic and about life and what goes on inside your house. And that's hard to draw out into a longer narrative. And then the next book, and the last one I'm going to talk about today, which I'm actually still reading, but I've read at least 70%, I think, because I'm reading on iPad again, so I see percentages. And I don't think my opinion will change about it after reading the ending, but if it does, I will definitely update you. That is Legends and Lattes, which has been all the rage recently. I think it came out at least a year ago, but, like, it feels like everyone's reading it right now, and it's the recent, or the current book club pick for Carrie Can Read's book club. So that kind of made me more interested to read it too. But this book is very cozy and kind of episodic and very enjoyable if you're in the right mind state. This is another one that I bounced off of before, and maybe because I just wasn't in an e-reading mindset then, or not in a fantasy mindset. And that's where, again, I will say, like, this is very much high fantasy. There's, like, orcs and succubi and gnomes and all of these, like, fantastical creatures, and it's in, like, a high fantasy world in this town. But it worked for me because it immediately gets down to the character, and the language is very, like, modern and straightforward and simple. But I like the approach that it takes with the language, because it occasionally will, like, turn a phrase to sound very old fashioned, so you feel like you're in that world without wading through, like, antiquated language. So for me, that's the sweet spot for kind of a fantasy that makes you want to feel like you're in a high fantasy world. And I think that is what sells me on that kind of setting. But anyway, it's about an orc who gives up her life of pillaging and killing and general violent orc things. She's kind of like a mercenary, I guess. She gives up that life to start a cafe in a small town and live a quiet, simple life and kind of retire. And it just follows her as she sets up her cafe. And it's funny because, like, it's kind of about her inventing the first cafe, because it has all these modern, like, current day things in it. Like, it has, Like she brings coffee to a town that's never heard of coffee, and then she makes lattes. And I think she made an Americano at one point, and she eventually makes like to-go cups, and she has like an espresso machine, and she gets like air conditioning, and I don't know, just these things that feel very, they make like chocolate croissants and like cinnamon rolls. They make cinnamon rolls, but like just all these modern real world things, it feels like they're inventing one by one like a modern cafe in a old timey fantasy world, which is kind of funny, and you really have to suspend your disbelief. But it's really just cozy and like chill vibes, and I've really enjoyed it. It's reading really fast. Like I'm just plowing through it. I thought I might actually finish it before this video, but I just didn't quite make it. But like it's going so fast. Like it's very enjoyable to read, and it's very much like a kind of queer found family with different. There's like an orc and a succubi and a, oh no, I forget the name of the other, like the handyman, is a different kind of creature, and there's like a magical cat, and just all these things. And the other thing is gnomes in this world are like, I'm picturing them as like really like the trendsetters, like they're way ahead in technology. So everything that comes that people haven't seen before, like coffee, for example, and like espresso machines and like high culture things, and I think some other like modern technology sounding pieces that they found as well came from gnome culture. So gnomes are like, they're with it. So if you ever end up in a high fantasy world, especially this one, and you want some modern technology, you're lacking that and missing it, just go find a gnome village because they've apparently got it all. And there is like an overarching storyline, a plot about a thing that I won't spoil, and like some bad guys closing in and kind of threatening the main character, and she's, yeah, just trying to live her life and have her cafe and fight off the bad guys. But it's just fun. It's enjoyable. So if you're in the right mindset and in the mood for that, it will hit the spot, and it will make you crave coffee and lots of pastries. I think I've doubled my coffee intake. I don't drink a ton of coffee, but like I would have like a cup of coffee every day. Now I have 2 cups because I need one when I read it. So be prepared. If you decide to read it, you will want coffee. That was my March. I read a lot of books, a lot of kind of middling good books, and some standouts too that, yeah, I'd say it was a very productive, a very good reading month. And I just want to give a quick shout out before we go. Finally, there's a tie-in. I have one of my favorite content creators out there who has done it all from Twitch streaming to podcasting to YouTube and beyond, question mark. Lady Orange has a podcast that is really enjoyable called Under the Orange Tree. It's a self-proclaimed variety podcast where they talk about all things from life in Quebec and French and cats and just life in general and music. And she gives a preview of a new song that she's been working on in her recent episode that's really good. But anyway, I'm allowed to plug this here because she also talks about some books in the latest episode. So go check out Under the Orange Tree too for some more great book content. And yeah, I'll leave you with that. I'd love to hear what you've been reading lately and what you think of, like, do you ever have times when you just can't focus on a book in electronic or paper format? And if so, like, how do you get through it? Is it just finding the right book, or is it like switching formats? Switching formats worked for me this time. Like there's something so immediate about a paper book, because reading on a screen, you have access to the entire internet usually on whatever device you're on. So it's so easy to get distracted. It's so easy to just look up a quick thing that you're reading about and then you're gone. Whereas in a paper book, you're there, like you have the thing and it has the book in it, and it doesn't have anything else in it except for maybe some special features or whatever at the end. And I enjoyed too, like just spending time with paper books because you miss out on the little things, like where you have a paper book in your hand and you read a bit, and then you're like, I'm done, I'm satisfied for now. So you close the book and you like look at the back cover and you think about it, and you read like the about the author and the acknowledgments, and you close it, and then maybe you read another chapter and like just experience the book as object and like the different format of things in it. I don't know. I just enjoyed spending time with some paper books lately, and I'm very excited to get some more at the book fair. If you also have any recommendations for books I should look for when I'm there, please let me know. I am taking requests. That's weird. Yeah, let me know if you have any recommendations that I might find there. I think it may not have books from before 2020 because they weren't taking donations as of the last fair because they had so many backed up. But they might have books since 2020. So, like, if you have any books pre 2020, that is more likely that I will find it. Anyway, thank you so much for hanging out with me. This was a bit of a longer video, so I appreciate you spending this time with me. I was gonna say time is money, but that's so dumb. Time is really valuable, and money is just a concept. Your time is real. So I really appreciate you spending your time with me. I love hanging out with you and talking about books and hearing what you're reading. So again, yeah, please let me know down in the comments below what you've been reading and any recommendations you have. And with that, I will let you get back to your reading. Happy reading, everyone. I'll see you next time.